So when we're talking about doing certified welding or welding to a code, there is 3 different documents that you typically need. A PQR, which is a procedure qualification record. A WPS, which is a welder performance qualification. And a WPQ, a WPQ is a welder performance qualification. A WPS is a welding procedure specification. You probably want to write this down.
You write it out.
Can we?
Sure.
¿Qué trajiste? Puta, y un lapicero, ¿verdad?
I do not. What's that?
Can I use a piece of paper?
Yeah.
Good man.
Actually, Ben, if you go to the document server, because if you want to pack it as well,
I've got mine from last week, but Monday. But what
I was gonna say, 'cause he was short one too, so if you wanted to print some off,
I still gotta print some off. What name is it under?
it's under the document server, it's under school, and it's called school packet.
It's easy enough.
¿No ves?
Good? So PQR is a procedure qualification record, WPS is a welding procedure specification, and a WPQ is a welder performance qualification. So what the heck does all that mean? So, let's say Atlantic Welders calls me up and says, hey Andrew, I gotta do work to AWS D1.1, and I need welding procedures, and I need my welders qualified. What we do is we open up the code book, right? We ask Atlantic a couple questions. How thick is the material? You know, what type of material? How thick is it? What type of filler metal do you want to use? That sort of thing. We open up D1.1, which is a structural steel code. And the first thing we do is we figure out whether or not what they're doing is pre-qualified or needs to be qualified by testing. What I mean by pre-qualified is that there's certain filler metal joint and base metal combinations that the code says, hey, there's no reason to test this, it's been done a bunch, so just do what the code says and you're fine. So if it's pre-qualified, right, then all we have to do is write them a welding procedure based on what the code says. After we write them a welding procedure, the next thing we do is we'll get their welders in here for welder performance qualification tests. Every code has guidelines for a welder qualification test. All it is a guideline for how to set up the plates and how to position them to test the welder. Once we test the welder, the code gives us guidelines on how to process the test piece. So it'll say, here's what you have to look for a visual test. After you do a visual test, you got to cut it up and do bends or tensils or whatever else the code might require. You pass those tests, we issue a piece of paper that says you're a certified welder and lists all the variables of your test and what it qualifies you for. That's called a WPQ. So at the very least, anytime a company's doing certified welding, they should have a WPS, at least one WPS, right? That's their procedure that all their welders will follow. And then a WPQ for every welder, all right? Now, let's say that same combination Atlantic Welders called up about wasn't pre-qualified. Now, along with doing welder qualification tests, they also have to do a welding, a procedure test. What the procedure qualification record is it's a list of all the variables involved with that procedure test plate, as well as the results of our testing. So, your welding procedure is like your recipe for producing a sound weld. Your procedure qualification record is proof that your recipe works. And then your welder quals are proof that your welders know how to use the recipe. Does that make sense? Can we say that again? Is everybody comfortable with that?
Please, yeah.
Say it again? Okay. So, your WPS is like your recipe. Your PQR is proof that your recipe worked. And your WPQ is proof that your welders know how to follow that recipe. Okay. Every code is going to have its own set of what are called essential variables. Essential variables are anything listed in the welding procedure that the code says is so important that if it changes, your welding procedure is no longer valid and you have to requalify. Examples of essential variables could be the process that you're using, MIG, TIG, or stick, you know. It could be the wire that you're using, the base metal that you're using, the amperage range or the voltage range, what type of gas you're using. Depending on what code you're working to, these could or could not be essential variables. And a lot of it makes sense. So if you qualify a procedure using TIG welding, right, it's going to say right on that procedure that the process you use was gas tungsten arc welding. Well, obviously that procedure is not going to be valid if you decide to MIG weld instead of TIG weld. Does that make sense? So what it says is that if you want to MIG weld instead of TIG weld, you got to get another procedure done for MIG welding and get your welders qualified to do MIG welding. Okay? So the important thing to remember about essential variables, and what I mean by important is I know there's a question on the test about it, is that an essential variable is anything that's important enough that if it changes, you need a new WPS.
And what body establishes those essential?
So that all depends on what code you're working with. So it's either, primarily it would either be ASME or AWS, but it all depends on what code you're working with.
Do you mind running that definition to essential variables once more?
Reading it, writing it, just okay.
Saying it.
So an essential variable is any variable in a welding procedure that if it changes, the procedure requires requalification.
Is there gonna be a quiz on, all this stuff?
There's going to be a test at the very end.
Okay.
The very end of this whole thing, not the end of the night.
Alright.
You give us hints on the test?
I'm trying to. I'm not writing it on the board if it's not on the test.
Can I take a picture of it?
Sure.
Alright, I got you at, variable welding procedure that if it changes, that's right, that.
Okay. So I can't start in the middle of it. An essential variable is any variable listed in a welding procedure that if it changes, the procedure needs to be requalified.
So basically, in other words, you're saying, if something changes in the welding procedure, you have to requalify.
Yeah, so take a look at the last page of the packet. That's a sample welding procedure, right?
Okay.
So that lists base metal, filler metal, joint geometry, the type of gas you're using, the flow rate of the gas, things.
Somebody need one of these, right?
So, it's going to list your filler metal type. So depending on what code you're working to, all or some of the variables that are listed on there would be considered essential. Some of them are not. So not too many codes would list the size or the diameter of your filler metal as essential. Because what they figure is that, if 1/8 inch 7018 works welding A36 carbon steel, well then 332 or 532 are going to work as well. Does that make sense? But again, process or polarity, if those change, then the procedure could need requalifying. So not every variable listed on a procedure is considered essential, but the ones that are considered essential, if they change, require the procedure to be requalified. Any questions on a PQR, a WPS, a WPQ, or essential variables? You all feel pretty good about that? Sure.
In this spec, shielded metal part, which process is that?
Stick.
That's stick.
Yep.
That's why there's no gas.
You got it. The other thing I wanted to go over with you guys, and I think I talked about this with a couple people after class on Monday. Welder certification is a little bit different than getting licensed to other trades. So you hear people talk about how they're a certified welder, but then other people are a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber. There's no such thing as a licensed welder or a master welder. If anybody ever told you they're a master welder, that's just a title they gave themselves. They don't have a piece of paper that calls them a master welder. Welding is not governed by the state the way electrical or plumbing work is. That's why you're licensed by a state to be a plumber, or licensed by the county to be an electrician. Welding relies on the codes to govern them. The AWS codes, the ASME codes. Because of that, you're not going to get one certification that qualifies you to do everything. So if you're a plumber and you get licensed to do plumbing work in Anne Arundel County, then you can do whatever plumbing work's involved in Anne Arundel County. The way codes work is you get certified to a code. So you get certified to a structural steel code, or an aluminum code, or an aerospace code, okay? And there's not one code that overpowers the other. So if you're certified to an aerospace code, and then you get a job to do, ground level handrails, right? Well, you might have the physical capability to successfully complete those welds, so you're qualified to do that work, but you're not certified to do that work. Does that make sense? It's kind of like, if you have a license to fly an airplane, right? An airplane's probably more difficult to fly than a car is to drive. But just because you have a license to fly an airplane doesn't mean that you can hop in a car and go cruising around the Beltway. You need a driver's license and a pilot's license, okay? And one doesn't work for the other. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so now, the other thing I want to talk to you about is each class is a little different. What did we do? We only took one break Monday night, right? Or did we take two?
one.
We took one break. So what are you guys thinking? I usually don't do more than 2 breaks, but it's 3 hours of sitting in a classroom.